The light from the crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling shimmered down onto the glossy walnut dining table, where each ivory porcelain plate and crystal glass was placed with the precision of a royal banquet. I sat across from my mother-in-law, Margaret, the woman who always exuded a cold, commanding presence as if she were the one who set the rules for the entire Hawkins family. Tonight's dinner was held at their lakeside estate in Connecticut, where even the floor tiles seemed to speak of wealth that had lasted for 3 generations. I used to think I was accustomed to these glamorous gatherings, but tonight, something felt off. Margaret sat at the head of the table, wearing an elegant moss-green velvet dress, her platinum hair neatly pinned back without a strand out of place. She gracefully lifted a silver cloche, revealing a salad arranged like a piece of art, crisp romaine lettuce, thinly sliced almonds, ruby-red pomegranate seeds, and a glossy golden dressing. "This is a recipe I learned from a Michelin-starred chef in Napa Valley," Margaret said, her voice syrupy sweet, but her eyes sharp as a razor. "I made it especially for you, Katie." I nodded slightly, smiling with my lips while my stomach tightened. Something in the faint aroma rising from the salad made me want to recoil. It wasn't spoiled, but there was a strange scent, like diluted cleaning agent, hidden beneath the tang of balsamic vinegar. I tried to stay composed. "Thank you," I whispered, masking my cautious glance. Across the table, my sister-in-law, Madison, had already started eating. She was always quick, always eager to be the center of attention. "Delicious," Madison exclaimed after the first bite, dabbing her lips with a silk napkin. She glanced at me as if to say, "See, nothing to be afraid of," but I wasn't convinced. Daniel, my husband, was deep in conversation with his father about the company, completely unaware of the tension stretching taut between me and his mother. I picked up my fork, gently turning the salad on the plate as if admiring the presentation, but in truth I was battling my instincts. My logic told me not to eat, and I had learned that a woman's intuition in a family like this should never be ignored. I glanced at Madison's plate, already nearly half empty. My heart raced, and in a single moment, I knew what I had to do. I pretended to adjust my napkin, shifting slightly forward in my chair. My movement was so subtle it seemed unintentional, but only I knew I had switched our plates in a blink. Madison didn't notice a thing. She was too busy bragging about her latest investment success, basking in her parents' proud gazes. But Margaret noticed. I could feel her stare piercing through my makeup as if she were stripping away every thought I had. I lifted my head and gave her my sweetest smile, returning her scrutiny with calm eyes. As I took the first bite, actually from Madison's plate, she tilted her head, her lips curving into a subtle expression I couldn't quite read, satisfaction or disappointment. I chewed slowly, swallowing without a hint of expression. The taste was ordinary, nothing remarkable, nothing frightening. But in Margaret's eyes I saw a shift, small, fleeting, but enough for me to know I had done the right thing. And then I waited, not to enjoy the food but to see just how specially prepared for me it really was. I had just set my fork down when a light cough broke through the lively chatter across the table. Madison covered her mouth with her napkin, then coughed again, louder, harsher. Everyone turned to look, probably thinking she had simply choked, but my eyes didn't leave Margaret. She sat upright, raising her wine glass like she was watching a well-rehearsed play. "Madison, are you all right?" my father-in-law Harold asked across the table, his voice tinged with concern. Madison nodded, forcing a smile, but her complexion was already paling. "Maybe. Just a bit of strong seasoning." I sat still, my breath a little quicker than usual. The scent from the salad in front of me now seemed irrelevant. Madison raised her water glass to her lips, but her hand shook, causing drops to spill onto her dress. Daniel, my husband, finally noticed something was wrong. He turned, frowning. "Mad, are you sure you're okay? You don't look well." I feel a little dizzy," Madison said, blinking rapidly as if trying to push away a wave of nausea. She braced herself on the table, then suddenly clutched her stomach. I heard Margaret set her wineglass down, not loudly but deliberately. She tilted her head, voice smooth as velvet. "Maybe you ate a little too quickly, or perhaps your body isn't used to the special ingredient." I leaned slightly, glancing at her. Her eyes remained calm, but beneath the gentle tone was something chilling. Madison abruptly stood up, her chair scraping against the floor with a loud screech. She was still holding her stomach, her breathing quickening. I'm sorry, I need to use the restroom, she stammered and rushed out, stumbling slightly. Silence fell over the room. Harold watched his daughter leave but didn't rise. Daniel had pushed his chair back, ready to follow. It's best to give her a moment, Margaret said, her gaze brushing past me. She needs to settle down. I studied her closely. She wasn't worried, she wasn't panicked, she was observing. I took a slow breath, my chest tight. Everything that had just happened wasn't a coincidence. I remembered her eyes when I switched the plates. She had seen, she had known. And Madison, the precious daughter spoiled for 30 years, had just taken the consequences meant for me. Part of me felt shaken, the other, validated. That salad wasn't just an appetizer. I took a sip of water, my hand trembling slightly. Margaret turned to me, her expression soft, as if we were sharing a sweet little secret. Did the salad suit your taste? She asked, her smile gentle as if nothing had happened. I nodded slowly, revealing nothing. It's delicious. You have exquisite taste. She gave a slight nod, a flicker of satisfaction crossing her face. But I saw something else. A flicker of doubt, small as the first crack in thick ice. I was the only one, the one who had eaten Madison's portion, still sitting here, perfectly fine, and she knew it. The silence in the dining room gave way to awkward whispers. My father-in-law tapped his fingers on the table. Daniel turned toward the hallway where Madison had vanished. I glanced at the clock. 5 minutes, 7, 10. Rushed footsteps echoed down the hallway, and then the dining room door swung open. Madison returned, her face pale, eyes red, lips trembling. She didn't speak for a few seconds. Then, her voice broke through, strained. That salad. Something's wrong with it. I turned to look at Margaret. She was calmly dabbing her mouth with a napkin. Perhaps you're allergic, she said, not even looking up. Could be the almonds or pomegranate? Madison shook her head. I'm not allergic to anything, but... I felt short of breath, my heart was racing, and my body went numb, like... She trailed off, swallowing hard, unable to find the words. Margaret stood up, her expression showing just the right amount of concern. All right, I'll call the family doctor to check on you. We shouldn't take any chances. I froze, watching the entire scene unfold like a play. I wasn't sure if I was an audience member or the antagonist. Madison suddenly turned to me. Katie, did you eat the salad? I kept my composure. Of course. Why do you ask? She looked at me for a long moment. 1 second. 2. Then turned away without a word. But that look said everything. When Madison sat back down, I could feel the entire atmosphere in the room shift. Every glance, every movement, every soft clink of a fork against a plate carried a new, unspoken caution. But more than anything, there was the way Margaret quietly observed me through her flawless mascara. She didn't say a word, but I knew. She was waiting for a reaction. A tell, a slip, anything to confirm I had realized her little game had failed. I gave her nothing. Instead, I sat up straight, took a sip of water, and gave a faint smile like I'd just heard an amusing old story. Daniel whispered beside me, "Do you think Madison needs to go to the hospital?" I shook my head slightly. "If she does, your mom will make that call, you know that." And we both knew it was true. In this family, everything, from meals to breaths taken, went through Margaret Hawkins's unspoken approval. A few minutes later, Madison excused herself to go lie down, still a bit unsteady, but her color was better. I sent her off with a slight nod, a quiet glance for someone who had just stepped into a spiral she hadn't realized she was pulled into. Margaret stood up shortly after, wine glass in hand, and walked toward the fireplace, where flames danced in a meticulously polished brass hearth. "Are you feeling all right, Katie?" The question came gently, almost concerned, but nestled within was a needle, trying to pierce through my mask. I walked slowly toward her, stopping about a yard away, far enough to maintain distance, close enough not to appear evasive. "Perfectly fine, thank you. The salad was tasty, something different." Margaret turned her head, her smile keeping its perfect curve. "It's good to refresh the palate once in a while. Familiarity can make people careless." I nodded, not breaking eye contact. "Exactly. Just like relationships, sometimes you need to re-examine them to see what's really underneath the surface." A moment passed. Then she gave a soft laugh, delicate as glass chiming. "You seem more mature every time you come back." Must be the air around here always keeps people alert. She tilted her head, lifting her glass. You're a smart girl, Katie. That can be both a blessing and a danger. I didn't respond, because we both knew this conversation wasn't really about the salad or Madison's health. It was a declaration of war. Without weapons, without shouting. Just a glance, a smile, and the right amount of silence. That night I sat in my reading room where I could finally breathe easier, away from velvet drapes and probing eyes. But not 10 minutes had passed before there was a soft knock on the door. I opened it. Madison stood there. Gone was her usual confidence. She looked unsettled, a little shaky. Do you have a few minutes? I invited her in, made us both a cup of mint tea. Madison sat in the armchair by the window, her hand still trembling slightly in her lap. You know, she began, staring into her cup. I've never had any issues with food, but tonight, something was off. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like my body was reacting to something I've never encountered before. You think it was the salad? Madison looked up at me, lips pressed tightly together. At first I thought it was just me, but then I remembered. You were about to eat my plate. I raised an eyebrow, keeping my tone steady. Really? Are you sure? We were sitting next to each other. She hesitated. I just felt something was strange. Mom said it could be an allergy, but I'm not allergic to anything. And then, the way she reacted. I don't know, Katie, something's not right. I set my cup down. Are you saying you suspect your mother? Madison said nothing. Her eyes wavered. Not suspect, but maybe. I've never looked at her differently. Until tonight. I didn't say more. I knew that once the first crack appeared in the wall of trust, all it took was time for it to spread. What do you think? Madison asked, her voice barely a whisper. I smiled, stood up slowly, and walked to the window. I think sometimes we need to ask the right questions, and to the right people. She didn't reply, but I knew Madison had started to see what I had seen all along. This war wasn't loud, no blood, no tears, but every glance, every word, was carving the line deeper between me and Margaret. It was nearly midnight when I heard the knock. Soft, but firm. I stepped out of the reading room, still wrapped in my thin cardigan over my silk dress. When I opened the door, Madison was already there, arms crossed, her face tense enough that I could almost hear her thoughts racing. I can't sleep, she said, her voice rough. Do you have a few minutes? I stepped aside and let her in. The light in the room wasn't too bright, just enough to catch the subtle expressions she was trying to hide. Madison stepped inside, pausing like she didn't know where to begin. Finally she turned to me, her eyes suddenly sharp. You switched the salad plates, didn't you? No pretense, no hesitation. And I didn't dodge it. I walked over to the bookshelf, poured 2 glasses of water, and set one in front of her. What do you think? I replied, my voice as light as the air in the room. Madison frowned. I don't think, Katie. I'm asking. I looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Yeah. No gasp, no shock. It seemed she already knew, she just needed to hear it from me. Why? I sat across from her, legs crossed. Because it didn't smell like anything I've ever tasted. Because of your mom's eyes when she placed it in front of me. And because I didn't believe it was a gesture of goodwill. Madison was silent, her hand tightening around her glass. You know, I continued slowly, ever since I walked into this house, Margaret has never shown me a single sign of warmth. But suddenly, a special dish just for me appears the day you come home after weeks of no contact. And that dish, you ate it, not me. Nearly had you calling a doctor. She sat down, her shoulders drawing in like she was slowly realizing something inside her had shifted. But Mom loves me. I didn't argue, I just looked her in the eye. You've believed that for 30 years, but tonight, did you feel loved? Madison bit her lower lip, her gaze unsteady. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe, I interrupted gently, just enough to make her face what had happened. Or maybe, for the first time in your life, you're starting to wonder whether the love you've received was genuine, or just a reward for absolute obedience. Silence. Outside, the wind tapped softly against the window. Inside the warm room, I could feel her thoughts crashing into each other. She furrowed her brow. So, you think Mom did this to you on purpose? And I I was just the one who took your place? I said nothing, but the silence was answer enough. Madison stood up abruptly, pacing like someone lost in a maze. That can't be, she murmured. Mom's never treated me badly. She's always protected me, always put me first, always picked me to represent the family. And you never wondered why? She turned to look at me. Because I always did what she wanted? I nodded. Exactly. You're the model, the perfect heir, the tool Margaret uses to maintain control without ever stepping into the spotlight. Madison dropped into the chair, her usual confidence gone. She didn't cry, but something in her eyes shattered. Like the solid ground she had always stood on was now cracking beneath her. You don't hate my mother? She asked softly. I shook my head. I don't hate her. But I'm cautious, and you should be too. Madison stayed quiet for a long time. I used to think you were an outsider, someone from a different world who didn't understand how this family works. I smiled. And now? She looked up at me, and for the first time there was no defensiveness in her eyes. Now I think, maybe you're the only one who's seen the truth I've always tried to ignore. I nodded slowly. And in that moment I knew, the game had changed. Margaret might control everything, but she hadn't expected that the daughter she placed her highest hopes on would be the first to see the cracks in the empire she'd built. The next morning I went down to the kitchen earlier than usual. Not because I was hungry, but because I needed to talk to the one person in this house who knew everything and had never said a word. Emily, the housekeeper who had worked for the Hawkins family for over 10 years, was wiping crystal glasses, her movements so precise they seemed programmed. When I stepped in, she looked up, slightly startled, but quickly gave her usual polite smile and bowed her head. Good morning, Miss Katie. What would you like for breakfast? I'm not hungry, I said softly. Just a cup of tea, if that's okay. Emily nodded and began preparing it. I walked to the table and sat in the chair near the window, where I could look out over the back garden. A long silence passed between us, broken only by the soft clink of a spoon against glass. When I first came to this house, I began, still gazing outside. Margaret told me everything here ran like a Swiss watch. Not early, not late, never off beat. Emily remained silent. Last night, I think I saw the first gear slip out of place. I turned back to her, met her eyes directly. And I think you saw it too. Her hands paused, then she slowly placed the cup of tea in front of me. What are you asking, Miss Katie? I tilted my head, unhurried. I want to know. Was Madison the first to be affected after a meal? Emily stood up straight, her hands clasped together, her face unreadable, a look I'd seen often on Margaret. But this time, it didn't scare me. She wasn't the first, Emily said, her voice low, like wind rustling through thick curtains. But she's the first to show such a clear reaction. My heart beat faster. Who else? A flicker of hesitation crossed Emily's eyes. Then she stepped closer to the table and lowered her voice. Several people have felt unwell after dinners here. A friend of Mr. Harold's, a business associate of Daniel's, even an old girlfriend of his. And it was always a coincidence? Emily gave a small nod. Always random. A little allergy, a little indigestion, a bit of stress. No one ever questioned it. I inhaled deeply, my chest tightening. Why didn't you say anything? Because everyone believed it was just fate, and because I've always been on the sidelines. I studied her more closely. And now? She looked up, her eyes no longer avoiding mine. Now I think it's time someone reset that clock. I stood and slowly stepped closer. I need to know everything, every detail, every shadow. Do you know if Margaret keeps anything? Emily looked at me for a moment, then gave a slight nod. There's a safe in her study, behind the portrait. I'm guessing it holds more than financial records. No, she said. It holds files, little pieces of everyone in this family. Margaret documents everything, habits, preferences, weaknesses, even things they tried to bury. And you've seen them? I've cleaned around it. I saw my name in one of the thin folders. Did you take it? I didn't dare, but I know you're the only one who would. I nodded, my thoughts a blur but my purpose clearer than ever. Margaret didn't just control with words or presence. She controlled with knowledge. By knowing more than anyone thought she did. I left the kitchen, the tea still warm on the table, Emily didn't walk me out, but her gaze followed me all the way to the hallway, like a silent message. I'm with you, this time, true. As I passed the living room, I saw Daniel on the phone, his voice tense. He spotted me and gestured that he'd be right there. I only nodded and kept walking. I couldn't wait any longer. Tonight I would go into Margaret's study. I would open that safe. And if what Emily said was true, what I found might not just shift the game. It might destroy the entire empire Margaret had built over 3 decades. The only question left was, what would I do with that truth? Night fell over the Hawkins estate like a thick velvet curtain, eerily still. Upstairs, the light in Margaret's room was off. Daniel was still downstairs talking to his father, and the rest of the house had gone quiet. I stood by my window, looking out over the garden, where moonlight filtered through the trees, casting scattered shadows across the lawn. A soft knock behind me made me turn. It was Madison. She wore a long sweater, her hair tied back, her eyes tense but clear. Are you sure you want to do this tonight? I nodded. Best chance. Your mom never leaves her room when she knows someone's in the house, but tonight, she took her sleeping meds. Madison stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Did Emily give you the spare key? To the study, yes, but the safe will have to guess the code. She exhaled softly and nodded. Let's go. We stepped into the hallway, our movements as quiet as shadows. The old wooden floor creaked softly beneath our feet, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Margaret's study sat at the end of the West Wing hallway, beside the library. The large oak door loomed before us like a gateway to another world, one where Margaret wasn't just a mother-in-law, but the wielder of absolute control. I slid the key into the lock. A soft click. The door opened, revealing a space arranged with surgical precision. Books sorted by color, objects aligned perfectly, every corner devoid of randomness. We stepped inside and closed the door. Madison went straight to the portrait above the fireplace. A painting of Margaret in her youth, her gaze as icy as it was now. I moved the painting aside, behind it a small steel square, an in-wall safe. Do you know the code? I asked. Madison shook her head. No, but she always uses numbers that matter to her. Grandma's birthday? I tried, nothing. Wedding date? Still wrong. My palms began to sweat. Then Madison whispered, my birthday. I glanced at her. You think she'd use that? I'm her pride and joy. If it were you, wouldn't you use Daniel's birthday? I entered the numbers Madison gave me. Click, the safe opened. We held our breath for a second. Inside were neatly arranged folders, each labeled with names. Daniel, Harold, Emily, Madison, and a few others I didn't recognize. Maybe business partners or old acquaintances. Madison's hands trembled as she picked up the one with her name. She opened it, and I saw her eyes darken as she read. She's been tracking me since college, Madison whispered. Who I dated, which classes I dropped, even that time I borrowed money from a friend and didn't tell Mom and Dad. I picked up Daniel's file. Printed surveillance photos, financial reports, printed emails, and handwritten notes. Insecure when compared to Harold. Doesn't know how to say no. Easily manipulated through guilt. Oh my God. Madison pulled out the thickest file, labeled Harold. Inside were copies of bank documents and wire transfers to an unfamiliar account in the Cayman Islands. I can't believe this. She kept all of it. For what? To keep everyone in check, I said, my voice dry. She knows everyone's weak spots, and she holds them like a knife to the throat. No one leaves. No one dares to push back. Madison looked at me, eyes red. So, last night's dinner? It really was meant for you? I nodded. There was nothing left to hide. She took a deep breath. And I was just the substitute. I stepped beside her, gently. But now you can be the one to change everything. She stared at me, then slowly nodded. We'll use this, Madison said, her voice firming, to expose it all. I held Daniel's file tightly. Madison clutched hers to her chest. We didn't take everything. Just enough to fight. And win. Before we left, I glanced back at the open safe, secrets laid bare in the shadows. Tonight an alliance had been formed. And Margaret Hawkins had just lost her greatest weapon, fear. I had just closed Daniel's file and carefully tucked it into my coat pocket when the office door creaked open. It was a soft sound, but in the thick tension of that room it rang like an alarm in my chest. Madison froze. I turned around. Margaret stood there. No makeup, no silk, just an ivory nightgown, but still radiating that same arrogant control. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, and her eyes, sharp as honed blades, swept across us like she had known all along what we were doing. I didn't move. Madison took a step back, clutching the file like she could hide it inside her ribcage. Margaret stepped in, quietly closed the door behind her. No rush, no noise. As if she were entering a tea room, not catching her own family breaking into her most private space. I always wondered, she began, voice low and even, when you'd stop playing the obedient daughter-in-law and show your true hand. I slowly turned, standing tall. Maybe around the time you served that special salad to the daughter-in-law you've never liked. A moment of silence. Then Margaret smiled. Cold. Bone-chilling. If you think you've accomplished something tonight, you're more naive than I thought. Madison spoke, her voice shaky. Mom, you knew I was here too? You're always there, Madison. Margaret turned to her daughter, eyes softening. But it was the softness of silk draped over a steel trap. You've always been the most predictable piece in this game. Madison flinched slightly, but didn't retreat. I stepped forward, placing myself lightly between them. You can call it a game, but this time I made the first move, and you're the one across the board. Margaret narrowed her eyes. You think a few files are enough to scare me? I raised the folder high, my tone surprisingly calm. No? But what's in here? Untraceable money transfers, psychological profiles of family members, surveillance notes. It's enough to destroy your standing in the community, maybe even spark an investigation. A tense minute passed. Margaret glanced at the file, then looked at Madison. Do you really think I wanted to hurt Katie? Madison didn't hesitate. After last night, I don't know what you're capable of. Marguerite's eyes darkened. You don't understand. Everything I've done was to keep this family from falling apart. I let out a faint laugh. By blackmailing every member with their secrets? Or by planning your weekly menus based on who you hated most that day? I did it because you're weak, Margaret snapped for the first time. You don't know what it takes to survive in a powerful family. You think freedom is noble, but this family doesn't last if everyone does whatever they want. I took a step closer. And you think fear is what keeps it alive? Margaret didn't speak. Her face no longer wore its polished mask. This was the real woman, one who had spent her life controlling everything with invisible reins, now watching those reins slip from her grip. I tilted my head. This game isn't the same anymore, Mother. The rules you wrote are outdated, and we, the pieces you once controlled, are now sitting on the other side of the board. Margaret closed her eyes for a second, as if holding something back. Then she opened them, her voice low and sharp. You don't know what you're unlocking, Katie. These secrets aren't just mine. And you're not the only one who knows how to use them, I replied, voice hardening. I'm not here to destroy you, I'm here to stop you from destroying everyone else. A silence fell over the room, thick and heavy. Then Margaret took a step back, her gaze shifting. I underestimated you. I nodded. And that was your first mistake. Madison stepped beside me, no longer hiding her file. She looked her mother in the eye one last time. You can keep your fear. I choose truth. Margaret said nothing. She turned, opened the door and paused in the doorway. You've won a round, but the war is far from over, Katie. I smiled. And I'm ready for every step. The door closed. I turned to Madison. She took my hand. Cold, but steady. And tonight, Margaret realized, the control was no longer hers. And I, the one she once saw as the weakest, was now leading the final game. The next morning, the Hawkins estate was draped in a strange, heavy silence. No murmured conversation over breakfast, no clinking of dishes. Even the staff's footsteps seemed softer, as if they too could feel the quiet tension rising like steam. I sat alone by the dining room window, my tea long gone cold. Madison was still upstairs, barely speaking since the confrontation. She needed time. I understood that. But Margaret didn't need time. She acted. I heard the steady click of heels in the hallway and I knew she was coming. The door opened and as expected, Margaret entered. Not the mother-in-law with her neutral expression, but the real Margaret, the woman who never stayed down for more than a night. She walked in as if she still owned every inch of the house, her posture perfect, her face flawlessly made up, like last night had never happened. "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice calm and unnervingly steady. I set my cup down and looked up at her. "Do you want to talk? Or do you want to issue a warning?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled out the chair across from me and sat, fingers laced together on the polished walnut table. Her cold eyes locked on mine. "You think you've won a game," she began, "but this isn't a simple chessboard, it's a maze. And the one who thinks they've found the exit first is usually the first to get trapped." I didn't respond, I waited. "You don't understand, Katie, what you're toying with. Family, reputation, legacy. They aren't just possessions. They're structure. A system built over years with sacrifice and calculation. Break one link and the whole thing collapses. And when that happens, you won't be the only one paying the price." I tilted my head, gently asking, "So what will you do? Tear it all down or watch it crumble in your hands?" Margaret clenched her hands, but only for a second. "If I have to, I'll do whatever it takes to protect what's mine." I raised an eyebrow. "The question is, what is it you're protecting, the family or your power? Because you can't have both if you keep manipulating everyone." "I'm the only one holding it all together," she snapped. "Without me, do you think Daniel could lead, Harold keep the community's respect? Madison, she'd collapse without direction." "No," I said slowly, my eyes meeting hers. "They'd stumble, but they'd get up, because at least then, they'd be themselves." Margaret was quiet, then she leaned back, a faint smile crossing her lips. But this time it wasn't pride. It looked almost tired. "You think I'm afraid?" she asked, voice low. "I'm not afraid of losing my reputation, Katie. I'm afraid for the ones who don't understand the game well enough to know when to stop." I kept my voice steady. "The problem is, you never let anyone stop. You forced them to keep playing, until they were exhausted or betrayed themselves." Margaret stood, her posture still rigid, her gaze unflinching. She walked closer, stopping behind my chair, tilting her head. "You may think you're holding the knife," she whispered, "but in this house, knives always have two edges, and once it's drawn, there's no turning back." I looked up at her. "Then I'll be the first not to turn back. And if we're going to face off, at least I'm no longer afraid of anyone's shadow." Margaret stood there for a moment, then she turned and walked away. The sound of her heels echoed down the hallway. Colder, heavier than before. I stayed seated, staring out the window. The Connecticut sky that day was overcast. But inside me I knew dawn was coming. Not peace, but the light of a real battle, one that, for the first time in my life, I wouldn't face alone. And Margaret knew it. She may have ruled through fear. But now, that fear would become the fire that burned down the throne she built from power and silence. The game was still on. But the final move would be mine. In real life, there are many like Katie, walking into powerful families where affection is masked by control and manipulation. But the truth is, silence never protects. When we have the courage to face the shadows, ask the hard questions, and speak the truth, we don't just protect ourselves, we give others the chance to break free. The battle isn't always loud, but true strength lies in stepping up and never turning back. What do you think of Katie's story and her quiet but determined face-off with her mother-in-law? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss more powerful stories about life and family.